The world is full of geographical facts that people accept as truth without ever questioning them. But what if I told you that some of the most common facts you've heard are actually wrong? For instance, did you know that Greenland isn't as big as it looks? Or that the Sahara Desert isn't the largest desert in the world? Buckle up, because we're about to bust 40 geography facts that most people get wrong. At number 1, most people believe that Greenland is bigger than Africa, and looking at this world map, it certainly seems that way. But in reality, Africa is about 14 times larger than Greenland. The reason for this misconception comes from something called the Mercator projection, a map distortion technique that stretches land masses near the poles. Greenland may look like a giant ice-covered monster, but it only covers 2.16 million square kilometers, or 834,000 square miles. Africa, on the other hand, is a staggering 30.37 million square kilometers, or 11.7 million square miles. So next time you see Greenland looking massive on a map, just remember, maps can be deceiving. Number 2. Is the Nile River really the longest river in the world? Well, that depends on how you measure it. For years, the Nile held the title at 4,130 miles long, flowing through 11 different countries before reaching the Mediterranean Sea. But recent studies suggest that the Amazon River might actually be longer, measuring 6,800 kilometers or 4,225 miles. The problem is that the exact source of the Amazon is debated, and measuring rivers isn't as simple as drawing a straight line. Number 3. You've probably heard that the Sahara is the biggest desert in the world, right? Wrong. A desert isn't just a place covered in sand. It's defined by how much precipitation it gets, and by that definition, Antarctica is actually the world's largest desert. Covering 14 million square kilometers, or 5.4 million square miles, it's almost twice the size of the Sahara, which comes in at 9.2 million square kilometers, or 3.5 million square miles. So while the Sahara is the largest hot desert, Antarctica holds the overall title. Number 4. If you think the international dateline is a perfectly straight line, think again. Unlike the prime meridian, which is a fixed straight line, the international dateline zigzags like a snake through the Pacific Ocean. Why? Because countries didn't want to be split into different time zones. Some islands even changed their official time zone so they wouldn't be a day apart from their neighbors. The next time you look at a globe, take a closer look. You'll see that the dateline is anything but straight. At number 5, a lot of people think Istanbul is the capital of Turkey, but it's not. Ankara is. Istanbul is Turkey's largest city, but the capital was moved to Ankara in 1923 to help develop the country's interior. And here's another cool fact. Istanbul is one of the only cities in the world that sits on 2 continents, Europe and Asia. At number 6, you might assume the Panama Canal runs east to west, but surprise, it actually runs northwest to southeast. That's right, if you sail through the canal from the Atlantic to the Pacific, you're actually moving southeast, not west. This is because of the way Panama curves, making the canal's direction counterintuitive. It's one of those little details that makes geography all the more fascinating. Number 7. Most people think Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world, and technically it is, but only if you measure from sea level. If you measure from base to peak, then Mauna Kea in Hawaii is actually the tallest mountain on Earth. While Everest stands at 8,848 meters, or 29,029 feet above sea level, Mauna Kea reaches 10,210 meters, or 33,500 feet from its base deep in the Pacific Ocean. That said, if we counted underwater mountains, Everest would have some serious competition. Number 8. If you imagine the North Pole as a chunk of land, you're in for a surprise. It's actually just ice floating on water. Unlike the South Pole, which sits in Antarctica, the North Pole is just a frozen cap of ice floating on the Arctic Ocean. And because it's constantly moving, there's no official permanent location for the North Pole. It's always shifting. Number 9. Can you see the Great Wall of China from space with the naked eye? Well, contrary to popular belief, the answer is no. While the Great Wall is incredibly long, 21,196 kilometers or 13,171 miles, it's also quite narrow, making it hard to spot from space without a sophisticated zoom lens. Even astronauts have confirmed that it's not easily visible from orbit. While the Great Wall is an engineering marvel, you won't be spotting it from the moon anytime soon. At number 10, some people think Russia and China don't share a border, but they actually have one of the longest land borders in the world, stretching over 4,200 kilometers or 2,600 miles. The Russia-China border is longer than the entire width of the United States. And while it's not as well known as other international borders, it's an important one. China and Russia share key trade routes along their boundary, so the next time someone says Russia and China aren't neighbors, you can set them straight. At number 11, you've probably heard the Four Corners Monument marks the exact spot where Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah meet. But guess what? It's actually a little off. Due to surveying errors from the late 1800s, the monument is misplaced by about 550 feet, or 168 meters. But here's the catch. The US government legally recognizes the marker's current location, so even though it's not scientifically perfect, it's still the official Four Corners. So if you visit, you're technically in 4 states, just not exactly where the map says you should be. 12. Many people think Monaco is the smallest country in the world, but that title actually belongs to Vatican City. Monaco is tiny, covering 2.1 square kilometers or 0.81 square miles, but Vatican City is even smaller. Just 0.49 square kilometers or 0.19 square miles. That's smaller than most shopping malls. Despite its size, the Vatican is a fully independent country, complete with its own currency, postal system, and even a secretive Swiss Guard military unit. At number 13, think Hawaii is just off the coast of California? Not even close. Hawaii is actually 3,900 kilometers or 2,400 miles away from California, roughly the same distance as New York to London. It's one of the most isolated places on Earth, which is why it has such unique plant and animal life. Nearly 90% of its native species are found nowhere else. So if you thought Hawaii was just a short boat ride from California, think again. 14. Some people think the equator only crosses a handful of countries, but in reality, it passes through 13 different nations. These include Ecuador, Colombia, Brazil, São Tomé and Príncipe, Gabon, the Republic of the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda, Kenya, Somalia, Maldives, Indonesia, and Kiribati. Many maps might make it seem like the equator is just a straight line through Africa, but it actually weaves its way through multiple continents and islands. Number 15. You might assume that the geographic center of North America is somewhere in the US Midwest, but the tiny town of Rugby, North Dakota currently holds this title and embraces its status with a monument. However, the exact center is still up for debate. Some scientists argue it's actually a few miles away. Adding to the controversy, the nearby city of Center also claims the title based on newer calculations. Shifting sea levels and glacial melt further complicate the issue, and without a clear definition of what constitutes a geographic center, the debate continues. So while Rugby proudly holds onto its claim, the real center of North America might still be waiting to be discovered. At number 16, most people think Australia is way smaller than the US, but in reality, it's almost the same size. Australia covers 7.69 million square kilometers, or 2.97 million square miles, while the contiguous United States, not including Alaska and Hawaii, is only slightly bigger at 8.8 million square kilometers, or 3.12 million square miles. But here's the crazy part. Australia has just 7.5% of the US population. So while the two landmasses are close in size, Australia is way more open and empty. Number 17. People often think Venice is just sinking, but it's actually tilting too. Venice is sinking at 1 to 2 millimeters or 0.04 to 0.08 inches per year. But what's even weirder is that it's slightly leaning eastward due to uneven land movement. If Venice doesn't get its flooding problems under control, future generations might not just be dealing with a sunken city. They might be looking at a lopsided one too. 18. A lot of people think Mount Kilimanjaro is in Kenya, but nope, it's actually in Tanzania. Even though Kilimanjaro is often pictured in front of Kenyan landscapes, the entire mountain is inside Tanzania's borders. But here's why the confusion happens. Many travelers visit Kilimanjaro from Kenya because it's easier to get there from Nairobi than from Tanzanian cities. While you can see Kilimanjaro from Kenya, you'll have to cross into Tanzania to climb it. 19. You might think the Mississippi River is the longest in the US, but that title actually belongs to the Missouri River. While the Mississippi is an iconic American river at 3,766 kilometers, or 2,340 miles long, the Missouri stretches even farther at 4,341 kilometers, or 2,692 miles, making it the true longest river in North America. The kicker? The Missouri River flows into the Mississippi, which is why many people think of them as one big system rather than separate rivers. 20. Most people assume that all countries with a navy must have a coastline, but that's not always the case. Just ask Bolivia. Despite losing its coastline to Chile in the late 1800s, Bolivia still has a navy with about 5,000 personnel. They mainly operate on Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world, and Bolivia's river systems. Even though Bolivia is landlocked, its navy hasn't disappeared. It's just adapted to life on lakes instead of oceans. 21. You've probably heard that the Seven Hills of Rome are massive, towering features of the city's landscape. But in reality, they're not as noticeable as you might think. Over centuries, urban development has reshaped the city, making the famous hills much less prominent than they once were. In fact, some visitors walk right past them without even realizing they're standing on one. While the Seven Hills are a huge part of Rome's history, don't expect to find towering peaks in the middle of the city. Number 22. Most people assume that Africa is the only continent with no cold regions, but that's not true. Some parts of Africa actually get snow. Places like the Atlas Mountains in Morocco and Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania regularly experience snowfall and freezing temperatures. In fact, Kilimanjaro's peak stays covered in ice year-round, even though it sits just 300 kilometers or 186 miles from the equator. 23. Did you know that there's an African country where Spanish is the official language? Many people assume no African nation speaks Spanish, but Equatorial Guinea does. This small country in Central Africa was once a Spanish colony, and today Spanish remains the dominant language, making it the only African country with Spanish as an official language. The next time someone says Spanish is only spoken in Spain and Latin America, you can hit them with this fact. Number 24. Think the most remote place in the ocean is just a short distance from land? Not even close. Point Nemo, located in the South Pacific, is the most isolated spot in the ocean, so remote that the International Space Station is sometimes closer to it than the nearest land. It's over 2,688 kilometers or 1,670 miles from the closest inhabited land, meaning if you're stranded there, astronauts might be your closest neighbors. Number 25. Believe it or not, New Zealand is missing from a surprising number of world maps. Despite being larger than the United Kingdom, it often gets left out, sometimes due to poor map design and sometimes because it's so far from other countries that cartographers forget to include it. There's even a website called World Maps Without New Zealand, dedicated to tracking this bizarre phenomenon. The next time you see a world map, take a second look. New Zealand might not even be there. 26. Most people assume Reno, Nevada is east of Los Angeles since Nevada is east of California. But guess what? Reno is actually farther west than LA. It sounds crazy, but due to the way California's coastline curves inward, Reno sits at 119.8 degrees west longitude, while Los Angeles is at 118.2 degrees west. It's one of those weird geography facts that messes with your sense of direction. 27. If you think most of the world speaks English, you're in for a shock. Only about 15% of the world's population speaks English, including both native and second language speakers. That means a massive 85% of people on Earth don't speak English at all. So, while English is a global language, it's nowhere near being the majority language. Number 28. Most people think Mount Everest is the farthest point from the center of the Earth, but that title actually goes to Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador. Because Earth isn't a perfect sphere, it's slightly wider at the equator. Mount Chimborazo, despite being shorter than Everest, is actually the farthest point from Earth's core. So, if you really want to stand at the highest point on Earth, you'll need to head to Ecuador, not Nepal. Number 29. Ever heard someone say the Earth is a perfect sphere? Well, it's not. Earth is actually an oblate spheroid, which means it bulges slightly at the equator and flattens at the poles. This means that the places along the equator, like Quito, Ecuador, are technically farther from Earth's center than anywhere else. The next time someone tells you Earth is a perfect ball, you can correct them with some science. At number 30. Most people assume that each country has its own time zone based purely on its geographic position, but that's not always the case. China spans 5 geographical time zones, yet the entire country operates on a single official time zone, Beijing time. This means that in Western China, the sunrise can be as late as 10 a.m. Meanwhile, France has the most time zones in the world, 12 in total, because of its overseas territories. 31. Most people assume that the Mediterranean Sea has multiple natural outlets to the ocean, but in reality, there's only one, the Strait of Gibraltar. This narrow waterway, just 13 kilometers or 8 miles wide, is the only place where the Mediterranean connects to the Atlantic Ocean. So, if the Strait of Gibraltar ever closed off, the Mediterranean could slowly dry up over time, turning it into a massive salt flat. 32. Think Old Faithful is the most predictable geyser in Yellowstone National Park? No, not quite. While Old Faithful erupts roughly every 90 minutes, other geysers in the park, like the Steamboat Geyser, are even more powerful, reaching heights of over 90 meters or 300 feet. While Old Faithful is famous for its reliability, it's not actually the most impressive geyser in the park. 33. A lot of people assume that Mexico City is the highest capital city in the world, but that title actually belongs to La Paz, Bolivia. Sitting at 3,650 meters or 11,975 feet above sea level, La Paz is so high that visitors often experience altitude sickness upon arrival. Mexico City is still pretty high at 2,240 meters or 7,350 feet, but La Paz takes the crown as the world's loftiest capital. 34. Think Africa and Europe are about the same size? Not even close. Africa is so massive that you can fit the United States, China, India, and most of Europe inside of it at the same time. But thanks to distorted maps, Africa often looks much smaller than it actually is. In reality, it's one of the biggest land masses on Earth. At number 35, you might have heard that all the world's oceans could fit inside the Pacific Ocean, and while that's not exactly true, it's pretty close. The Pacific Ocean covers 165 million square kilometers, or 63.8 million square miles, making it almost as large as all the other oceans combined. So while it wouldn't fit everything, it's still the biggest body of water on Earth by a long shot. 36. Most people think the Sahara Desert is just hot all the time, but did you know it regularly experiences freezing temperatures at night? With almost no humidity to retain heat, desert temperatures drop dramatically after sunset, sometimes reaching as low as 10 degrees below 0 Celsius or 14 degrees Fahrenheit. In fact, the Sahara Desert sometimes gets snow. It may sound unbelievable, but this scorching landscape has experienced multiple snowfalls over the years. When cold air from higher altitudes moves over the desert at just the right time, temperatures can drop low enough for snow to form. 37. You might assume that South America is directly south of North America, but it's actually much farther east than most people realize. In fact, Quito, Ecuador sits east of Miami, and the entire continent is tilted diagonally, rather than aligning perfectly below North America. This misconception stems from the way most maps use the Mercator projection, which distorts landmasses and their relative positions. In reality, much of South America, including countries like Venezuela and Brazil, extends far into the Atlantic, aligning more closely with the US East Coast than many expect. The next time you look at a world map, take a closer look. South America isn't quite where you think it is. 38. Many people believe that the Canada-US border is completely unguarded, but that's far from the truth. While it's often called the longest undefended border in the world, it actually has hundreds of border crossings and security checkpoints, plus high-tech surveillance systems. So while it's not a militarized border, it's definitely not unprotected. At number 39. You might be surprised to learn that Copenhagen isn't in Sweden. It's actually the capital of Denmark. Because of its close proximity to Sweden, just a short bridge away, many people confuse it with a Swedish city. But Copenhagen is 100% Danish, and it's one of the coolest, most bike-friendly cities in the world. And finally, at number 40. Many assume that the Philippines has the most islands of any country, but that record actually belongs to Indonesia. Indonesia is the world's largest archipelagic nation with over 17,000 islands, though only about 6,000 are inhabited. The Philippines still has an impressive 7,641 islands, but Indonesia takes the crown as the king of islands. And there you have it. 40 geography facts that most people get wrong. Which one surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss out on more mind-blowing geography facts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.